My name is Brian Flynn, and I'm running for Congress in New York's 19th Congressional District.
Okay. You want to say
Sure, yeah. Maybe let's just start with the easy ones. Like, can you tell us where you're from and how old you are and about your family?
Sure. I was born in Rochester, New York, and then my father was a salesman. My mother was a teacher. So because he was a salesman, we moved around quite a bit. We lived in northern Westchester, and then I spent most of my childhood in New Jersey through high school. I have been married to my wife for 20 years this year. I have two kids, Bo, who's 15, and Hedda, who is 12. Hedda is smashing the patriarchy every day, starting with her father. I am the third generation of my family to choose Greene County as our home. My immigrant Irish grandfather was a bartender in the Irish Catskills in Leeds. So my father spent his childhood there, and that's what prompted us to come back here about 15 years ago. My wife grew up on a farm in North Dakota, so she was looking for something that was more rural in order to bring up our kids. So we called friends that we knew in Hunter, and we went up for a weekend, fell in love, and we rebuilt an old home that had burned down. And we're thrilled to be part of the community.
So you had mentioned New Jersey. What part of Jersey?
What part of Jersey?
Yeah.
Bon John, Bruce, the whole thing. I wasn't when I moved there, it was more of the rural part of New Jersey, out in Morris County,
Okay.
in a town called Montville.
Okay.
Not Montvale, that's fancy, that's Bergen County. This is Montville, where I spent about 10 to 12 years.
We're in northern Westchester.
Briarcliff.
I grew up in Yorktown.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
So we'll keep coming around the horn in Rochester.
In Webster, and I was born, of course, at Strong Memorial. They haven't actually put the plaque up yet, saying the birthplace of Brian Flynn.
You're working on it.
I'm working. Birthplace of Congressman Brian Flynn.
And what's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Amy Scheibe, Scheibe. She is a novelist. And
A-M-Y?
A-M-Y.
Okay. And how do you spell your children's names?
Bo, B-O,
Okay.
and Hedda, H-E-D-D-A. The Scandinavian names.
Is she related to Earl Scheib?
She knows Earl Scheib. She's not related to Earl
does?
Scheib. Yes, because her family, she grew up in North Dakota, and her family, and Earl Scheib is quite a prominent name in the area. She's not a relation, or that she knows of, but her family is also in the farm toy collecting business. They eventually got run out of farming and formed a new company. So she would speak about Earl Scheib. How do you know Earl Scheib?
Earl Scheib was the guy who would paint your car.
Yeah, exactly.
In 1995.
That's it.
I grew up with those commercials.
Yes, exactly. That's a sign. By the way, it's like a binary thing. Either you know who Earl Scheib is or you don't, right?
Yeah,
That's it.
exactly. Can you pass me my water? It's on the floor.
Oh, okay. He can see it. I
I didn't
can't.
need for him.
I couldn't see it.
I'm here to serve my constituents. I come from a long line of servants. This is what we do. It was actually a funny thing. Someone would say to me, people have it, when you run for Congress, especially in a Democratic primary, people put you under a microscope. So people said to me, well, where's your family home in Greene County? And my grandfather was a laborer. He moved up here to follow work. So, I mean, they were living in boarding houses and wherever they could get. So there was no family. The idea that we would have a family home is kind of classic tone deafness of people to realize that when you're an immigrant and you're just trying to get by and you're literally dirt poor, you go where the work is and you don't have a family. And they never owned anything. My grandparents never owned a home. But it's just an interesting perception people have. Like, where's your homestead? Like, well, the boarding house, whatever one they could get into.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And you're in Hunter now, Brian, right?
Yeah. And Hedda goes to the local public school.
Hunter as well?
Yeah.
Right? Awesome.
HTC,
Great.
Wildcats.
Yes.
It's an amazing school, and it's got terrific support from the community. There are only 17 kids in her grade. But because of that, when you're a seventh grader, you get to play in the high school sports teams, and you get to actually do the high school plays. She couldn't be happier. It was just a great environment.
You get a really good superintendent out there, Dr. Vickers.
She's tremendous, yeah, and whip smart. I mean, crazy smart. I was talking to her about the allocation of aid and how the formula works and how it punishes places like Hunter, because it's not actually based on income level. It's based on property values, which are inflated because of the second homeowners. So you really, a lot of the kids are getting free lunch, but we don't get a proportionate amount of aid based on that, just based on the formula at the state level. It's not a federal issue, but boy, did she educate me on that when I went to visit. And they've been great. They invited me into the classroom to talk to the kids, and it's great because it's a split town. A lot of times in small towns, which I think is great, and wish more of America was like this, you move back and forth between Democrats, Republicans, or whatever, depending on which cousin's running for a certain town board or whatever. And I think that's a healthier way. And so you go down to the diner and go to Selena's, or you're going to Dolph's, and you go in there and you talk to your neighbors. And it's not about, you don't have that division that I see in a lot of other parts of our country, and I see overwhelmingly online. I actually stopped calling it Facebook. I call it hate book. It really has, I find, created more silos and more disconnectedness rather than more connectedness.
So if you were elected, would you, where do you stand on the impeachment question?
Yeah, it's a great question. I had the opportunity to work with Bob Mueller for years. He was a lead investigator on the Lockerbie bombing that I was heavily involved with from an advocate perspective and from a policy and legislation perspective. So he was informing our process through the years, and I've met with him personally. And he is an unbelievably qualified professional. I have the utmost respect and trust in him. I believe we have to let due process take its course. The biggest mistake we could make was to rush to impeachment without the evidence, because there may not be enough evidence to achieve impeachment, but thankfully we have elections and people can judge for themselves. I believe there is. I believe that they're going to find it. I believe Bob Mueller and his team are the ones to find it. But also I don't think this election should be about impeachment either way. I think what we're seeing and what I'm hearing out there from Democrats is, and we did polling on this early on to find out what people are concerned about, and overwhelmingly they're obsessed about Trump. And I even heard it again this weekend. And I keep trying to tell them that it's not about Trump. He's the result, not the cause. And that the cause is actually what we've done to how we've ignored working people, how we've continued to leave small towns and rural communities behind, how we paid women a fraction of what they owed, we've done worse by communities of color. All those things actually helped allow, in my opinion, allow Trump to happen. Because it's that kind of disconnectedness, that despair, that income inequality, that's the pain that Trump preyed upon. And that's what I believe got him elected. So when I talk to people, I said, I get it, I understand your obsession, especially with Democrats and primary voting Democrats. I understand your obsession. I understand how it might upset you. But we will not connect with people, and we will not win this race if all we keep talking about. I'll tell you a story. We were in Coxsackie. Claire was with me at a parade, and this guy, we come around the thing, and Coxsackie's not a bastion of liberals, but, you know, there's some good Democrats there, and it's just people. And I'm just out there trying to meet people. And we come around a turn, and this guy goes, Brian Flynn, are you a Democrat? And Claire says, yes. And he goes, well, I'm with Trump. And I went over to him, and I said, well, that doesn't mean you can't vote for me. I said, you can vote for Trump and vote for Flynn. There's no reason you couldn't vote for me. I said, I'm not running against Donald Trump. I'm running against John Faso. I'm actually running to fix everything that's broken that's probably, you know, pissing you off, sir. And let's talk about that. So I had a conversation with him and, you know, found out he's concerned about his health care because it's tied to his employer. And he can't switch jobs because he's worried about losing his health. He's concerned about his job. He's concerned about his lack of retirement security. And I told him my plans for that. And that's what my whole campaign's about. And he goes, yeah, maybe I can vote for Trump and Flynn. I said, sure. Now, did I blame him for being a Trump supporter? Did I hate on him? No. And I think that's one of the things that, one of the ways we have to, not just in this election, but as a country, we have to start, again, just connecting with people and talking about the real issues that matter, and don't make it such a identity politics.
Can I jump in and add something? You brought up Lockerbie. Can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah,
your connection?
Sure. It was like this kid's down in Florida. When my brother was killed, I was just a teenager. And when your big brother is killed because he's American, it has an effect on you. And my carefree life as a college student was done in that moment. My family was destroyed. And I remember my mother has always been a fierce activist and advocate. She and I share something that whenever something pisses us off, we do something about it. And maybe it's an Irish thing, but we're often happiest when we're angry. And we actually, so we were pissed off, and but I'm talking days later, we were in Lockerbie. My mother was actually yelling at Margaret Thatcher, that saying, we have to find out who did this and justice must be done. And then a few weeks after that, I was at the White House at a protest. Here I was a college kid thinking, I was concerned, a few weeks before I was concerned about a calculus final. And now all of a sudden I'm protesting at the White House because my brother was killed in an act of war against the United States. So for decades afterwards, we went after major corporations who allowed it to happen, because the bombing could have been prevented. We changed airline security and aviation security. In fact, we had made recommendations that could have prevented September 11th, because we had actually recommended the formation of the TSA and recommended armored cockpit doors. One of the reasons why my brother was killed is because the airlines were in charge of their own security. And not surprisingly, we proved gross negligence and willful misconduct on the part of the airlines. But also, we went so far when we found out that Libya was behind the bombing, and that one of their intelligence officers had actually committed the bombing. We went forward and marched the halls of Congress, wrote op-eds for all the different papers. I wrote for the Wall Street Journal, for the Guardian, for Newsweek, did dozens and dozens of TV shows in order to advocate for our position to finally get the U.S. to pass a piece of legislation, unilateral sanctions, called the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act. I was actually quoted on the floor of the Senate at the passing of that. And the reason why that's important is that in order to achieve justice and security, we use sanctions and diplomacy. We didn't advocate invading Libya. We advocating holding them accountable for the act of war that they'd committed, the single largest act of war, the act of terrorism against the United States prior to September 11th. And we were effective. It was bipartisan, and we would actually go into meetings, and hours beforehand, the oil lobbyists were in there, because the oil companies were trying to get into Libya. It was BP and Marathon Oil and all that. So that experience has actually informed my activism, but it's also given me the tools I need in order to kind of step in to being a congressman and be effective right away. I mean, I've honestly spent more time in Washington getting legislation passed than John Faso has. So I think I can neutralize any advantage he might have by saying he's more experienced.
What prompted you to run?
To go back to the earlier point about when something pisses me off, it was that. I've always been an activist. I've been involved in immigrant rights, and actually I taught English as a second language to undocumented workers because I saw them at a soup kitchen I worked at. And I said, this is ridiculous. All we're doing is feeding them. We're not really helping them get the skills necessary. So a group of us put together a program to help actually give them skills, including teaching them English as a second language, which is hard for them to get courses because they were undocumented. I also did that environmental activism for the same reason. I got involved in helping start a specialized public high school, but the key was we did it with the teachers union, not against them. So when I saw the election, I decided to up my activism again, and decided to go to an activist meeting, just like many people did, to say, what can we do about this? And it was at this activist meeting when I heard this person who was training everyone how to be activists, because we had all these new people who were in the game. I'd been doing it a long time. I'm someone who marched against the Iraq War because I knew it was an unjust war, especially based on my national security experience, working on the Lockerbie case. And so I said, let's go to this training. It was in Gardner, in New Paltz. Heard about it online. And the trainer had actually said, this is the type of person we need to run. They need unique characteristics in order to beat someone like John Faso. They have to be someone that shares our values, so we don't just sell out and try to run, Republican and Democrats' clothing in a swing district, because some of the cynical perceptions are the only way to win swing districts is to run, basically pseudo-Republicans. And she said, no, we have to make sure someone has our values and has our back, but at the same time can appeal to moderates and rural Republicans. And she said explicitly, somebody who's maybe been a business owner and job creator, but also from her experience, because she lives in one of the rural counties, someone who's tough on national security, because there's almost an irrational fear in rural communities, or at least a heightened importance of national security and the potential threats of terrorism. So you got to be somebody who can be tough on those issues. So what she had described was a lot of the kind of a unique background that I have. So I decided at that point to dive in and see if I could be a good candidate. And I think among the people running now, I was the first that was in.
You talked about before, I think you said that what you had, one of the main things you had run your campaign on, one of the main platforms, I think you said healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Is that
Sure.
What's one of the most important issues to you as you're running your campaign?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, in order to stop Trump and to be honest, to stop extremism, we have to address those underlying issues that allow it to happen. And we have a plan. We call it our plan for the American worker that does just that. And it includes creating jobs based on my experience across sectors and specific to the sectors that matter here. It includes specific policies that will raise wages. So it's creating jobs, raising wages, but also removing those barriers that have kept people down, including systemic racism and gender discrimination, lack of access to health care and quality education. And what I hear from people in the district, healthcare is becoming an overwhelming part of what people's costs are, especially ones that are unpredictable. And it's taking up a greater share of people's wallets. And it makes no sense. I've advocated for Medicare for All for over a decade. I started in 2004. And I started an activist group called the Democratic Agenda because we all felt, it was a group of young Democrats, which of course Claire pointed out recently that we're actually middle-aged Democrats when we started it, but thanks, Claire. But we started this group, the Democratic Agenda, and we met with Rahm Emanuel, Sheldon Whitehouse, a ton of congressional leaders, and our group was saying to them, you can't just be anti-Bush, this is 2004, anti-Bush, anti-war, and expect to win. You have to stand for something. You have to believe in something. And the first thing on our agenda was universal health care and explicitly Medicare for all. And the reason why, and I've been thinking about this and assessing it, and I've done this both as someone who believes in it, that health care should be a right, not a privilege, but also as a business owner, I find the current system corrupt, inefficient, and ineffective. Completely ineffective. The United States spends more than twice any other developed nation on a per capita basis on health care, and we have the 37th highest health outcomes among the developed nations. So we have by far the most expensive, but it's not even close to the best. And it's explicitly discriminatory and uneven in how it's meted out to people. So when I go out there and talk to people in the district, it's overwhelmingly important to them that they have affordable health care, and I believe it should be equal access. Medicare for All will enable all of us to spend less on health care, everybody. It will provide better health outcomes. It will also cover more people. And critically, here in Columbia County, but in every county in this district other than Schoharie, it will create more jobs. The Affordable Care Act created 500,000 jobs itself. The Medicare for All will create more jobs than that in our communities. I have put together a group of experts, and I came to this based on both someone who's been an advocate, someone who's worked in the healthcare sector, somebody who's employed hundreds of people and provided health care to them, and somebody who's put together a group of experts on my team. And that group of experts has helped me come up with this plan for how we can get to Medicare for All and how it will enable us to cut roughly 30% or $1 trillion out of what we spend. Interestingly, in this race, and we show you the kind of comparison, we have a grid in the materials that we gave you, but in this race, two candidates, and there basically are three leading candidates, and two of the candidates do not believe in Medicare for All. And I'm not sure how they can come to that conclusion. Neither one of them has experience in the sector. Neither one of them has actually worked on it before. And I think it's because where they're getting their money and their messaging. They are either DCCC recruits or recruits from existing congressional leaders, or Antonio works at the nation's largest lobbying firm. They won't support Medicare for All. And to me, it's becoming a binary thing for me. It's a little bit like I believe a woman's right to choose is a binary thing for me. If you don't believe in it, then I really don't think you're a Democrat. And I'm starting to think that if you don't believe in Medicare for all, because what the rationale for keeping the current system is to let people keep what they have, if you do that, if you stay with employer-based health care, you will never be able to get to Medicare for all because it will undermine your ability to do that, because the wealthier and healthier people will be in a different risk pool. So the burden will overwhelmingly fall on taxpayers and the Medicare system, while the healthy, wealthy people, who I guess are clients of Akin Gump, stay over here. And what I can't understand is that Medicare for all, Medicare has been proven to work. The system, the approach of single payer has been proven to work elsewhere. The American Medical Association supports it. Physicians support it. I'm going to convince big corporations to support it because I'm going to reduce the amount that they spend on healthcare. I just can't understand, and this issue is a dividing issue. And the great thing to talk is this is a complete, which is rare. Primaries, you rarely have a policy difference. So I was so excited. We have an explicit policy difference among the three leading candidates. I believe, based on my experience and my track record, in this, and they don't. And I think that that's going to be something that's going to come up over the next 3 weeks. Sadly, people don't realize, because they say things like, well, I'm for universal coverage. John Faso says he's for universal coverage. He thinks everyone should be covered. They should just pay a lot for it. So that's why that distinction is really important to me.
So how, if you're elected, in what way would you, or have you thought you would implement this or work to make this happen?
There's two bills in Congress, one in Congress and one in the Senate. There's 676 in the House and Senate Bill 1804, which is Bernie Sanders' bill. They have a lot of similarities there, but they also have some differences, which is the legislative process. They will eventually be reconciled. I believe that the Bernie Sanders bill is the better bill, and as do my panel of experts that are from the district, including hospital administrators as well as physicians and researchers, and we went across and patient advocates. So I'm leaning towards the Bernie Sanders bill. Let's get a House version of that bill. Let's actually start to vote on it and reconcile it, and let's see if we can move it forward. And here's why we can move it forward. There's only two special interests who are against Medicare for all. They are the pharmaceutical industry and the health insurance industry. Not surprisingly, they're the two largest donors, and two of the largest who spend the most on lobbying. Those special interests have a stranglehold on Congressman Faso, as well as all of Congress, to be honest, and potentially other candidates in this race. So I explicitly believe that I can convince people to be for Medicare for all because it makes the most sense economically. And remember, it's not just our area where healthcare is the largest employer. The reason why repeal and replace failed of the Trump administration is because in Tennessee and Kentucky, when they thought the Affordable Care Act was going to go away, they were going to lose jobs in rural communities. And that's why it failed. The repeal and replace failed. Because all of a sudden, oh my God, this is a great job creator. In rural areas, it'll have the same effect here. That's a long answer. Well, it's not the largest employer there, and part of the reason is they don't have they have the Columbia-Greene has a small hospital, but it just based on the number of people who work in the area. Actually, some of the people who work even at that hospital live in Delaware because of where it's located. So it's just not of the percentage of jobs in that area. It's just not the largest. It's the second largest, but in every other one, it's the largest.
How do you think the tariffs are going to affect us?
The tariffs. The tariffs?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And an interesting thing, I have been for fair trade for a long time, and I've actually fought against unfair trade. I actually shut down a business in Asia and moved those operations to the States. That required us to invest in automation and upskilling our employees, and that move ended up creating 400 plus factory jobs here in the U.S. So I understand how there's unfair trade, and I do believe China in particular does cheat, and we have to hold them accountable. But I am also a huge believer in fair trade and the importance of avoiding isolationism. We know it didn't end well. In the 1920s, when the whole world went to isolationism, it shrinks economies, it actually reduces incomes, and it actually helps contribute to wealth concentration. So I am against this isolationism, especially if it's being done so arbitrarily by an administration that does it for cynical and political reasons. They're not doing it for strategic or economic reasons. They're doing it for cynical and political. So let's use one in particular, the tariff on solar panels, one of his first brilliant ideas. That explicitly cost jobs here in our area. And the reason why is what it did is it immediately increased the cost of solar panels, it made them less competitive, and therefore the sales went down because the math didn't work anymore. So what I was told was up to a third of the jobs in solar installation were threatened right here in our district by that one tariff. The same thing with the steel and aluminum tariffs. And the interesting thing about that is it's like, oh, it's going to help create some steel jobs in certain areas of Trump country. But the reality is the number of people that use steel in other sectors in our industry, which is where the real job creation is, were the ones who are going to be losing jobs because of the increased costs. The third thing is for our farmers in this area, it'd be devastating. It already is starting to be devastating. Just the talk of it threatens the farmers in our area, many of whom export out of this area. It's almost Soviet or oligarchic, if that's a word. Maybe it is. We can make it. In its now it is. In its implementation. This is kind of, you have these bureaucrats and oligarchs sitting in Washington, like Wilbur Ross and Donald Trump, deciding, oh, we're going to put tariffs in certain industries, having no recognition of the effect it's going to have, having no recognition of how it's actually going to hurt U.S. workers and U.S. taxpayers. And it's not even, and the fear that it's striking into small business owners who are going to have their costs rise and into consumers as well. And I believe part of, and all that being said, I believe there's a lot of things we need to do to adjust some of our trade agreements to bring in more pro-worker policies. For example, just like in Germany, which is one of the world's biggest exporters and one of the world's biggest traders, labor unions sign off on trade agreements. And I think one of the ways we can avoid some of the issues we're having now is to make labor unions a part of it. I've been endorsed by major labor unions. I'm a union member myself. And I believe that in order to establish a thriving middle class, you have to have a strong labor movement. And I think when you look at fair trade, that's one of the ways we can actually avoid some of the horrible isolationism and bad deals we have that hurt workers.
What union do you belong to?
The National Allied Workers Union. I've been a member for over 15 years. I've created union jobs as well. Those are basically textile-based jobs. The union is now called Unite. It used to be United Textile Workers of America. Now it's called Unite. So I've been able to create union jobs as well. That's one of the reasons why I've been able to get the backing. For example, the Transport Workers Union is one of the large labor unions that's backed us.
I was going to just go off on that for a second. We haven't talked about your business background.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about its acumen? Correct?
Yeah, that's one company I was involved with. So I've been a small business owner and an entrepreneur for a long time. It started when I was 11. Do you want to go back to when I was 11? You do. No, you don't. I had my first lawn business when I was 11. I mention that only because today it's one of the last things in life that still gives me joy. So I was mowing the lawn at the campaign office today, and one of the guys was driving. What do you do? Why are you? It's got to be done, and it's giving me a little bit of satisfaction in life. So I've always been involved in small businesses and technology and in media and in marketing. And then I set up a company in 2003, creatively called Schlossberg Flynn, started by a guy named Schlossberg and a guy named Flynn. And we looked for small to mid-sized companies. We would help start them, we would fix them, we'd help them grow, we would do whatever. Because I had already had experience doing that on my own, I thought, well, maybe I could scale this and do it for more companies at once. And one of the companies that I met through that process was Acumed. In 2008, I was introduced by some of the investors and the banks because in 2008, everything was in trouble and the company was teetering and needed someone to either shut it down or save it. So I went, it's a company up in Western New York. I went and was able to, in fact, stabilize the company, incredible employees, lifelong friends. We were able to stabilize that company and grow it from there. And it's medical device, textile-based manufacturing. So it's a vest for children with cystic fibrosis, a respiratory vest. It's compression garments that you'd wear post-surgically to prevent you from getting blood clots. And we make the products for the major medical product companies. So we're just the contract manufacturer, which is why you never would have heard of us. And what's been great about that, as I mentioned earlier, that's enabled me two things. One, it's enabled me to bring jobs to America. And as I said, we've increased our average workers' pay by 40% because we invested in automation, but we upskilled our employees. But the other thing is it's also given me a tough experience because I experienced a lot of the challenges that small businesses and farmers face here in New York State trying to run businesses. Because we have not invested in the transportation infrastructure, it's become very hard for businesses to move their product efficiently to market, especially in large textile-based manufacturers. When we were small, it was fine, but as we moved stuff into the States and got larger, it became untenable. So our customers said we had to move out of Western New York to the Southern United States, or we're done. It wasn't really a choice. So we brought the employees in. Many of them chose to move. Many of them were well trained, so they were able to, in fact, get jobs quickly. They were scooped up right away. Many of whom we had to pay to stay because they were able to find good work nearby. But what's interesting about that, and we moved some of them to North Carolina, to Pennsylvania, to Rhode Island, to West Virginia, and they continued to grow. And in fact, that's one of the reasons we were able to create those union jobs in Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, and one of our factories there, is because we had made this move. So because we made the tough decision, the business continued to grow and we were able to create more jobs. So today, I go to bed every night thinking there are 400 plus people that have decent jobs, decent wages here in the U.S. based on the work that we did. But it's interesting because people say, you've got a potential vulnerability against John Faso. And I actually look forward to him bringing it up because I've looked at his voting record and not once in his entire career has he voted to invest in transportation infrastructure or rail infrastructure. And I heard the same story from a farmer up in Hartwick in Otsego County who pointed out an abandoned rail line to me. And he said, yep, that's what killed my farm. I said, the rail line killer? He says, no. He said, when Reagan shut down the rural rail infrastructure, it prevented him from moving his product to his customers on time, and he had to shut down his farm. And there are a lot of those stories all throughout our district and New York State. So if John Faso, and that's one of the reasons I'm running, one of the things I talk about is the need to invest in infrastructure and transportation infrastructure so that my company could thrive and John Faso and that farmer could thrive. The other thing that people mention is that we had operations overseas. We did. I mentioned I shut down the Asian operation. We had a Dominican Republic operation as well because half of our products are sold overseas. We had a few hundred employees there. And the way I look at it, and I've always looked at it, is that the best way to do economic development in the third world is to give people fishing rods. So we've been able to lift people out of abject poverty, give them 3 times the minimum wage. We feed them. They work in air-conditioned, controlled environments. It's an unbelievable great success story. And people say, well, you outsourced those jobs. Like, no, I didn't. Those are jobs that work in concert with the U.S. jobs, and they actually enable the 400-plus U.S. employees we have. We couldn't do one without the other. The growth of jobs there was both organic and moved some of the jobs from Asia into the Dominican Republic. But again, it's one of the things that, I believe in fair trade, and I believe U.S. companies should sell their products overseas. And as I said, half of our revenue came from overseas. The key thing is to all of that is that 100% of our profits and taxes were always paid in the United States and in New York State. We didn't move the financial headquarters out of here or anything like that. So there are millions and millions of dollars of tax revenue that came to New York State between 2008 and today based on the work that we did. And just in case it comes up, we eventually sold the company because I was, again, hired by the investors. I didn't own the company. I was the president of the company. And I started as a consultant at first and eventually became an employee over time. We sold the company for $146 million. Of course, I said to someone, who knows what they bought it for? Maybe they bought it for $156 million and they lost money. It doesn't mean it's a vacuous number. But the reality is that the investors did well, and one of the largest investors was the New York State Teachers Retirement Fund, because that's who I was working for. They invest through one of the private equity firms. But I was actually given, like, 100-plus employees, I was given stock options and was able to make some money that way, just like everybody else.
I was going to say, Brian, I remember you talked about one of the campaign things that some of the big jobs to invest in now is green jobs. Could you maybe explain a little more about that?
Yeah, so I helped start an organization called Environmental Entrepreneurs. I did it back in 2000. There was a New York chapter of Environmental Entrepreneurs. And this group looked for policies and programs and legislation that would reduce emissions and protect the environment, at the same time creating jobs, hence the name Environmental Entrepreneurs. And we believe not only were they not mutually exclusive, in fact, we believe they're completely aligned, which is what I believe today. When you look at the opportunity we have right now for our country is to really invest in green jobs, which create jobs 12 times faster than any other sector. They need to be located here physically. So one is I want to transfer about $40 billion of subsidies currently going to the fossil fuel industry to the renewables industry. I'd like to pass a revenue-neutral carbon tax, which actually does have bipartisan support. in order to help fund and create those jobs. But the opportunities are everything from solar and wind and geothermal, but also, here's an interesting thing. The fastest way to reduce fossil fuel consumption is actually to increase efficiency. So one of our ideas is what we call the Climate Conservation Corps, which is basically paying people to go implement, especially in public buildings or commercial buildings, to implement those technologies, which will enable us to reduce fossil fuel usage and at the same time create jobs. And it's interesting. We've seen this movie before. It happened in the 1890s, it happened in the 1920s, this huge concentration of wealth and the removal of capital from the worker up into the upper class. The concentration of wealth we have now is unmatched in history. And what it's going to do is, basically Henry Ford put it best. He wanted to make sure that his factory workers could in fact afford to buy his cars. Metaphorically today, factory workers can't buy cars. You have a situation where we have income stagnating and going down, costs, especially for education, healthcare, and housing, going up, which are the three minor, and for fossil fuels. So at the same time, so you basically have this situation where I want to actually give an economics 101 class to Republicans to say the best way to grow the economy is to get money out of the hands of capital and back into hands of workers, especially in such a consumer-driven economy. So that's why I support these job creation initiatives, why I support a fairer tax system, why I support, for example, that $1 trillion we just gave away to shareholders. So that $1 trillion was nothing but a giveaway to shareholders. It didn't go to generating jobs. It didn't go to paying employees more. It went out the back door to shareholders, which is what we thought would happen. Here's an interesting thing in how I put this to voters. I said, you know what? I understand that you voted for John Faso and Donald Trump, and I don't blame you. Based on what Democrats have done for you lately, I get it. And we're humbled, and I'm here to tell you that I'm going to focus on your needs and your. But I can tell you, they told you they were going to try to take away your health care, and they did. They told you that they were going to do tax cuts for the middle class, and 87% of the tax cuts went to the top 1%. In fact, they took $1 trillion that they borrowed from you and your kids and your grandkids. $1 trillion. A third of U.S. shareholders are foreigners. So they borrowed $300 billion from our kids and gave it away to sheiks and oligarchs. The money's gone. Went out the back door. That money could have been used as part of creating a climate conservation corps, or creating jobs in healthcare, or just as importantly, it could have been used to reduce the $1.4 trillion in debt that a lot of young people have. And if you do that, guess what young people do with the money? They spend it. If that $450 that you're still paying for student loans, all of a sudden you don't have to pay it anymore, what do you do with that money? You spend it in your community. That generates jobs and economic activity. The U.S. government makes more on interest from student loans than it pays out in Pell Grants now. So that's why when you asked a simple question about how to create green jobs, and I got a little bit excited,
That's okay.
for which I apologize. But that idea is part of what our plan is and how we talk about it when we're out there on the campaign trail. And if you notice, I kind of try to position it as, I'm not blaming anyone for voting for Trump or for John Faso, but I do believe they've been betrayed. John Faso voted 8 times to take away people's environmental protections. He's voted for gun laws that do nothing to help the people in New York, but help the gun owners in Texas. He co-sponsored that reciprocity bill, which explicitly endangers people here in New York and endangers law enforcement here in New York. That's not helping the people in this district. So what I tell people is, it's not that you were wrong, but you have been betrayed. And Arthur Miller says it best, that betrayal is the only truth that sticks. And I think that's what we'll be able to use.
Speaking of, you're talking about gun law there. Where do you stand on gun control?
Yeah, so this is probably the most important issues of our time, and it's a shame, and we should all be ashamed that children need to lead us because we failed as adults. We haven't done our job, and I hold us all responsible. I don't just blame other people. I think we need to all start taking responsibility and say, I haven't done enough to convince people or find a way to find legislation that would do it. And part of that the problem is that we keep alienating people and we keep polarizing people. Rather than saying 90% of gun owners are not in the NRA, we have to make gun owners part of the solution. And living in Greene County, I'm a gun owner, and the majority of households in Greene County have a gun in the home. Kids in my daughter's class hunt for sustenance, not just for sport. It's part of the culture. So the moment is now, and we shouldn't let this moment pass. But let me tell you how I'd like to approach it differently than anyone else. I went to talk to my neighbor John, who is a gun owner and a Republican and an NRA member, one of the few NRA members left. And I said to John, listen, you know I'm running for Congress, and you may not vote for me. You may vote for me because you're my neighbor. But he said, you got my vote. I know you. I said, well, how about help me with gun violence? Help me. I'd like to have fewer dead children. Can we have fewer dead children? How can you help me out with that? You're a gun owner. I want your help. Help me craft legislation. Help me make this happen. Be part of something. He said, you really want to know? I said, yeah, tell me the truth. All right. He gets off his four-wheeler and says, now you're going to hear it. You ready for this, Mr. Congressman? I'm like, yeah, go ahead. He says, number one, close that gun show loophole. I don't buy my guns at a gun show. I don't know who does. Who's trying to get around what? I don't trust people who do that. Second thing is universal background checks. I got nothing to hide. I don't know why you guys let us not have that. It's crazy. Third thing is get the weapons of war out of the hands of children. I said, you meaning assault weapons? He says, yeah, there are lots of versions of them, but I don't own any. I don't know why anybody would. And he said, get them out of the hands of civilians. People shouldn't have them. And then he says, you know what, I hear there's some Dickey amendment that prevents from us getting information about what causes gun violence, and that's an explicit thing that prevents us from gathering data. Why would we not have something that enables us to understand what causes gun violence? And then he said, and you know what, now while we're at it, and this is, I never expected this, is while we're at it, I got a driver's license, but I don't have a gun license. I got nothing to hide. Just don't come for my guns. I am someone who believes in the Second Amendment and the right for my right for me to have guns, but I have no problem with you regulating them. Now the reality is, Antonin Scalia opined that the key phrase in the Second Amendment is well regulated. It's not about the Second Amendment. The problem is, and by the way, John pretty much gave me how I feel about what we can do for reducing gun violence. And we have to look at more broadly, not just at mass shootings, because on that day down in Florida, that said 17 kids were killed, 90 other people in America died from gun violence. So it's about mass shootings, but it's also about overall gun violence and what we can do about it. But I think John did a great job of describing it, and what I like the idea is making people part of the solution. I think it's a flaw of Democrats as much as Republicans, but I think we're worse at it. We just want to be right and not necessarily get something done. And it's more important to judge than to actually bring people in. And I think social media has made this worse. I call it silo media. It's created silos and hardened beliefs rather than enable us to broaden and expand. Go down to the diner and you'll connect more with people.
What makes you think you can make a difference? You can get things done in Washington?
Good question. A few things. One, based on my track record. So, and it's funny, I bring this up a lot. When someone says they're supporting another candidate, I say, great, I understand that. And then I, in a little bit of a playful way, I said, oh, it must be based on their track record. And they go, yeah, their track record. And I go, great, what is it? What have they done? What's their track record? Have they created any jobs? Have they helped pass legislation? Have they fought for progressive causes? Is there any documentation that they've ever done anything to support Democratic candidates? And interestingly, especially with some younger candidates, a lot of times there's not much there. And they say, well, I like what they say. Okay, I understand that. That's good. Well, the reason why I think I can get things done is that life has kicked my butt. And I've learned a lot by failing a lot. Whether it's in business, you try things that fail and you get yourself in trouble, you try it again, and you persevere and you get out of it. And along the way, you get better and you get smarter and you figure out how to get things done. When I was trying to get legislation passed in Washington, I learned by making mistakes. I learned you have to figure out how to win people over. In business, it's not just about you. It's not just about your employees. It's not just about your customers. It's not just about your suppliers or your investors, the banks, or the FDA. There are all these different constituents you have to manage. And those experiences, that collection of experiences that I've had, I think give me the ability to get things done and understand how to, and to find the path to do it. And the other thing is, I actually believe it also comes down to this idea of finding the common ground, right? Don't equivocate or moderate. I think one of the things that the politics of cynicism, and I think it really got worse in the 1990s, which is that, just basically pull everything to death and just tell people what they want to hear. You have no idea what you believe in because you're just basically trying to vomit back to people what you think they want to hear. To me, that's not leadership. I believe you have to go out and listen to people, but at the same time, you have to understand what you stand for, both as a Democratic Party and as potential leaders. So I actually believe one of the problems that we've had as a country is that we don't clearly, and especially Democrats, but we don't clearly state what we stand for. So I believe by going down to Washington and saying, this is what I believe in, now I might have to compromise on some parts, but you don't waver from your belief. I'll give you an example. I believe in comprehensive immigration reform. It used to be a bipartisan thing. Ted Kennedy and George W. Bush were pretty close on that issue. And Republicans used to want more immigrants because a lot of them are business owners and realize the value that they help with their businesses. I do understand how it's gotten to the point now where Republicans hate immigrants. And John Faso sent out a mailer recently that was attacking immigrants and talking about MS-13 and talking about, and this is amazing, talking about how we have to secure our borders. And, immigrants are a problem. And he has him pictured with a farmer. Now, I don't know if they actually made a mistake, but if you're attacking immigrants and your people you're hurting the most are your farmers in your community. And I know there are farms that are shut down, back to Schoharie, and Schoharie, I can't get workers. The ICE raids are killing us, we can't get the workers. And this is both legal and undocumented. It's really become a problem. So I believe that when I go to Washington, I know how I can get comprehensive immigration reform. I can find Republicans, old school Republicans, who believe in the value that immigrants bring to growing our economy. The U.S. economy is where it is. It's growing better than Japan or Europe because of immigrants. So I would actually make them part of the solution and explain to them we can achieve this. Now here's my point. Here's where we're going to compromise. I'm going to, of course, try to come up with a path to legalization and citizenship for all undocumented members of the community, in addition to DACA, right? The problem we're going to have is they might let me get legalization. They're not going to quickly give me citizenship and voting rights, right? So because that's just a cynical political thing on their part. I think we can get, so I know going into that chess game that might be the thing I have to compromise. Well, if that's it, if people can come out of the shadows and be contributing members of society, no longer threatened with deportation, but they're not necessarily able to vote yet, okay, that's a compromise knowing we might be willing to make going in. So that's why I believe if you think of things that way, we can find ways to get things done.
I was curious. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was curious to know, Brian. This is something that I've heard about a lot. In the campaign trail when I've covered things. Being from the area is very important. It seems like. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. As I said, I'm the third generation to choose Greene County as my home. My great uncle has a museum named after him right in East Durham, the Michael J. Quill Irish Cultural Center. So I have deep roots. And when John Faso said, all these carpetbaggers running against me, I made the point that I'd like to take John on a tour of the museum in the district named after my great uncle. Because my family's been here since the 1940s. I didn't move here to run for an assembly seat. And that's important because I think anybody who knows Greene County knows that you don't move to Greene County 15 years in advance, especially as a Democrat, in order to run for office. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that this idea that you have to be born and raised here in order to represent a district is a continuation of the nativism and xenophobia of our country. We've polled this. That's not what voters care about. It's the Republicans driving the narrative. So we are obsessed in the Democratic Party. We think that the reason why Sean Eldridge and Zephyr Teachout lost was because they weren't from here. Now, did they move here to run? I don't know. I mean, I know Zephyr, but I don't know if that's why they moved here. But it looked like that. I didn't move here to run for office 15 years ago. So I think that I even saw someone yesterday was saying, well, I think we should choose Pat Ryan or Gareth Rhodes because they grew up here. Well, Pat hasn't lived here in 15 years, and Gareth hasn't been here in 10 years. I grew up in Jersey. Should I go run there? I haven't been back there in 25, 30 years, but it's irrelevant. Whereas here, I've invested in my community. My wife's on the Hunter Foundation board. I've done dozens of community theater shows over the last decade and a half, embarrassed the heck out of my children. It's when you immerse yourself in a community, that's what you do. I mean, Dave Clegg and I are the only two running who have actually paid property taxes in the area. Considering the importance of property taxes, that's a big deal. But people say, well, I grew up here, so I'm running. I'm like, that's great, but where you been? So I think it's an irrational thing. My roots are deep enough. It's not a big issue. I did plan to move up here full-time sooner, but we were held up by my mother's Alzheimer's and trying to manage her care. But I do believe there's an oversensitivity to it. I mean, it's kind of like this way I look at it. I'm one of the only two people running who's a lifelong Democrat. And to me, that's a lot more important that you've been a Democrat, if you're going to want the Democratic nomination, than where you went to high school. And we have people who are former Republicans and not party affiliates who are saying, I'd like the nomination for the Democratic Party because I went to high school here. I think it's sad that the Democrats have allowed themselves to let the Republicans drive the narrative on this, and it's continuing every day. I go to these things, and I'm the 8th generation to live here. Blah blah. I'm like, when did we start hating on people who decide to move here? And the other thing, which is interesting, 70% of voters didn't grow up here, and the people in the Democratic committees who are very concerned about it have Queens accents and Staten Island accents and Bronx accents. They're like, yeah, well, where did you grow up? I'm like, but why? What does it have to do with anything? You've been here 35 years. It's a really interesting, a sad evolution. So I think my roots are by far deep enough. My wife works at the local public school. My daughter goes to school there. I don't think it's going to, and to be honest, remember Sean Patrick? He won without even having a residence in the district. Nothing. He did nothing. He didn't know second home. He didn't even have an apartment. And he won there. So I really think the fact that Zephyr and Sean lost, they lost for very different reasons and has nothing to do with it. But every time I go in there, I talk about 3rd generation, I talk about 15 years, I say all the things because it's such a heightened misperception that people have.
Why didn't you vote in the general election in district?
Because we were transitioning up in 16, and I didn't want to screw it up, whatever. So I think I registered here in late November.
Okay.
I think Jeff had moved here in early November. It's like, well, it's really an interesting thing. It's like, oh, that makes you more of it's crazy. I'm taking it seriously because it's a thing, and I talk about it openly, but it's not a thing with voters.
Are you finding that? Well, the district goes into Dutchess.
Yes.
It's the east side of Dutchess.
North of Dutchess, yeah.
Yeah.
And wraps around Poughkeepsie.
Right. You're not in Wappingers, right?
No, that's where it stops, is Pauling and down there.
Okay. Do you see that kind of thinking in that area?
Funny, you see it more in that area because it's mostly second homeowners or transfers. So the interesting thing is in Hunter-Tannersville, they love if anyone moves there. I mean, we don't have this us versus them. Right? I mean, especially if you're good at sports, right? My daughter, thank God, is good at sports, so they're like, yeah, she's great and whatever. If she wasn't, I don't know how happy they'd be. So there's a sense of, in small towns, rural communities, there's a hugging of people when they come there. A little bit different. I know in Columbia, there seems a little bit us versus them seems to be a little bit more of a thing. Over in Greene County, like in Durham, like, oh really? You're here? Please come. Yeah. Please. A person. Oh my God! And you mowed your lawn and you fixed up the place and this is great. So I'm hoping we get a little more of that hugging thing happening when people say it's not us, they're not going to ruin the character. I mean, what are you going to ruin? And we want more people, we want more energy, we want more, and it's not just retirees, we want people with young people. So, but it's interesting that the people who are most sensitive about it are the second homeowners and the transfers. And especially in Dutchess, and like one of the groups down there, an Indivisible group, just announced today that they're endorsing Pat Ryan. I said, "Oh, it's interesting. You guys seem quite progressive. I guess you don't believe Medicare for all anymore because he went to high school here." It seems cynical. That's my problem. I don't just say what you believe in and don't worry about this issue.
I have a question. Who are you supporting for governor?
Good question. This will shock you that neither the governor nor Cynthia Nixon have called me and asked me. Shocking, right? No, neither one of them have contacted me. I don't know either one of them. I've never met them. And right now I'm concentrating on this race and this thing. And I think like most people, over the next few months, I'll evaluate them. I have a tendency to be a little bit anti-establishment based on my background, what I've done. I did vote for Bernie Sanders. I was early on behind Barack Obama in the primary and actually set up an organization that got honored at the White House based on us taking an early stand with him. But I was a huge fan of Senator Clinton, or Secretary Clinton, and I worked with her previously. She's been very helpful in some of my advocacy work, so I was thrilled when she got the nod and was very, very supportive and excited. But with this election for governor, I haven't really paid attention. I think it's great that, the governor also honestly has a horse in this race, so he's not helping me win. So he's not winning my loyalty right now, but I don't think he really cares.
Yeah.
Again, he hasn't called.
No. Actually, at the beginning, we were going over the basics. You didn't say how old you are.
I'm very sensitive about that. I'm 48. I'll be 49 at the end of the month.
Have you ever run for any political office before?
Yes, I did run in 8th grade for student council president, and won, and won. So you drop the mic and say I'm out. No, I haven't run for political office before. Heavily involved in Democratic politics. Actually, Kirsten and I worked on that activist group. Kirsten Gillibrand and I worked on that activist group back in 2004, where I first got to know her. And then I helped campaign for her and raise money for her when she ran for the seat. At first, because we already had our home up there.
Group?
What's that?
What
the Democratic Agenda was the group that actually was where I first advocated for Medicare for all.
Back in 2004 you were talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you also tell us where, I don't know if you have any degrees, academic degrees.
Barely, but yes. Don't give me that look. I have a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from Georgetown. And
Barely, huh? Okay.
well, it's funny because when you go to Harvard, you usually mention it within about 30 seconds of meeting someone.
Right.
So we have a lot of Harvard guys in this race, and it does come up within 30 seconds of talking or them talking. And Frank Bruni made fun of me because I don't put it on my website. I don't talk about it. Where I went to college 30 years ago is irrelevant.
That's true.
Because what I've done since then makes me qualified for this job. It has nothing to do with where I went to college. And I appreciate, especially among elitist Democrats, it's very important. But among voters, to people who are out there and people in the community, especially working people, if you talk about where, especially 70% of Americans who don't have a college degree, it's almost tone deaf to start touting your college credentials, and I find it, especially in communities where we live, a little bit insulting. So you don't hear me talking about it, and I don't think it's that big a deal anyway. But the key is I did have a major in accounting, but most importantly, I minored in philosophy and theater.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that's why I still do community theater to this day.
Where did you do community theater?
I do it in Phoenicia, at the Phoenicia Playhouse. I do it up in Hunter-Tannersville there.
Cool.
We've been doing, and it's a kind of a family thing. My wife actually is in Mamma Mia at the Phoenicia Playhouse coming up.
Nice.
I was not allowed to audition. I actually have very little talent. I have tremendous enthusiasm, but no talent. So I sometimes get roles just based on my enthusiasm. And the funny, a little funny, people like the funny. But my wife has genuine talent, and so do my kids. And it's unbelievably depressing and frustrating to be the one in the family who doesn't have the talent, but has all the enthusiasm and excitement for it. So the theater stuff has been great in the community up here. And I even did a show during the race. I did a show in Phoenicia Playhouse, the World War II radio Christmas show. And I actually won votes because people are like, how absurd is it that someone's running for Congress and doing community theater on Friday and Saturday nights? And
That is really
it was a
awesome.
great show. It was a great show. Thanks, Claire. But it's a big part of being a part of the community and how we invest our time.
So you said Bachelor of Science in Georgetown, and any others? Or that's your...
No.
Okay.
No,
Just curious.
I said barely.
You
They
said-
let me out.
right.
It only took me 4 years, but it was touch and go for a while.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's it.
So and just to be clear, so your current day job is...
So the company I was involved in, Acumed, was eventually sold to a large corporation called Lear Corporation, Lear. They are a large automotive contract manufacturer. And they wanted to expand what they do. And they do a lot of textile-based stuff. They probably make the car seats in your cars. They wanted to expand into, so rather than just automotive textiles, they wanted to do medical textiles, manufacturing. So they approached us, and it's been great because it's enabled us to grow the business, provide even better benefits for our employees, and it's been a great. So I, who am not the best person to start inside of a large corporation, as part of the deal the plan was that I would move on at a certain point. So I stayed for a while, and then about 9 months ago, I moved on and have now been focusing on this.
Okay.
So on June 27th, I'll either be focused on this for another few months, or I'll be calling you guys for a reference for a job interview. But I most likely I'll go back to doing the same thing. And
What was your title there?
I was president of Acumed, but I will go back to.
Oh, but of Lair.
I was I was president of that
as well?
division.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
that small our division.
Okay.
But I'll probably go. I guess their corporate title was vice president. They have like lots of them, vice president or whatever. But That didn't last very long. And I'm going to go back, not to them, I'm going to go back and probably start another company or do something like that. I've got a lot of things that I'd like to do. But as I was saying, I guess it was to you, Dan, when I was coming in, that I'm in such a good mood and so excited because in the next 3 weeks, it's either we win, and it should be very exciting and be great, and I can't wait to go in the general, and that'll be lots of energy and fun, or it's over, right? So there's no real downside because it's been a long, over a year of doing this, and it's hard work, and it's 16-hour days, 7 days a week, especially for the last 6 months. It's been tremendous hard work.
I was going to ask Brian, speaking of positivity, there's been emails I've seen going around from, I guess, the different campaigns saying that it looks like all you guys, the Democrats, have promised to run positive or not wholly negative campaigns. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more on that.
Yes. So I committed that up front. If I need to attack people personally in order to win, I don't deserve it. And it's usually a sign that someone doesn't have game. I've been attacked personally for quite a while by their candidates or anonymously and all this other stuff. A lot of it's lies and distortions, which has been great because it actually gets you better and you actually get things out front. And I toughened up as a result of that. I have never swung back at any candidate that's attacked me personally, partly because I don't swing down. Mostly those who are attacking me are not the front runners. So it doesn't benefit you to attack other candidates. And I just don't, it's not the spirit of why I'm doing this. However, that being said, it's about to get real chippy. I think the two leading candidates, there are three leading candidates, and I know this from our internal polling. There are three of us that are basically in contention right now. And that would be Antonio, Pat, and myself. And then the next tier we're kind of coupled together, and then they're kind of coupled together, the rest of them. And then Erin is actually in a different category because she came in so late. And there's going to be the super PACs that are getting involved. Antonio was trying to stop Pat's super PAC from being involved, which is a cross-partisan PAC that supports veterans, and it's run by a Republican. And they'll shoot anyone as they just want their vets to win. And people say, part of the rationale is that, we have, Pat's rationale is that we should have more veterans in Congress. And that's a good thing for the country. And I don't have a strong opinion on that. The reality is, though, that 20% of Congress is ex-military or defense contractors. We only have 7% of the general population that are veterans. So as a group, they're overrepresented in Congress. And I believe that's one of the reasons why military spending seems to continue to go up, and defense contracting explicitly continues to go up. And we have 600,000 defense contractors. We only have 1.4 million soldiers. We have half as many, or almost half as many, defense contractors. And I think that having just real working people in Washington might be a good distinction. I am a union member, as I mentioned, and I would be the fourth member of Congress that's a union member. It is the most underrepresented group in Congress. 10%, 11% of the population is union members, yet less than 1% of Congress, which may explain why military spending keeps going up and workers keep getting screwed.
Absolutely. I hate to switch gears. I was curious to know also, big issue up here is the opioid epidemic. Mm-hmm. What would be some things that you could do to help with that, combat that?
Yeah, so I've been to a number of the forums here in Columbia County. There was one recently in Windham. First and foremost, we have to get it out of the criminal justice system and get it into be a health issue. It is an epidemic. We made the mistake, many of us remember this, we made the mistake with AIDS when we didn't treat it as an epidemic soon enough, and thousands of our friends and neighbors and lovers died. I believe we're at the same point now. We're not taking it seriously enough. We're not putting the resources. There are programs that are working. For example, Columbia Care for You with Pete Volkman and his program is working, but we have to scale those things faster and do it. But we also have to change our approach. We have to ensure that we have enough resources to provide for the rehabilitation facilities and then the recovery facilities afterwards. Right now, a woman told me the story that I was talking about the issue someplace recently, and she raised her hand. She said, "Please, it's all about access to help." And I said to her, "Great, thank you for that." And then she came up to me afterwards, and I'm so glad she did. She said because when her son was diagnosed, and it had been years of him being an addict, and they couldn't get him to, and then finally he raised his hand and said, I'm ready. I'm ready, Mom. I'm ready to go. And she was unbelievably excited, and she called around or whatever, and she finally got him a bed 23 days later. He died 15 days later. The other thing that people don't realize is the strength of these drugs. And if you look at, and if you think of 2 vials, like that, 2 vials, it takes about that much heroin to overdose. It takes about 5 grains of fentanyl to overdose. And what's happened is people are coming out of these facilities, coming out of jail often, they go back to their dealer, and often they get the same thing. They no longer have the resistance built up, and they die quickly from an overdose. We have to change so much about our approach to it, and everything from diversion therapy, having access, providing proper mental health. And it's one of the reasons why I support Medicare for All, including enhancing it with better mental health services. It's one of the areas where everyone forgets to talk about it, but it's one of our biggest deficiencies in our culture. I'm also for the legalization of marijuana, which also would enable us to provide alternatives to pharmaceuticals for pain management, but also for veterans who have also said that is a challenge for them with PTSD. And I have veterans on, as part of our campaign, that have helped advocate for that as well.